10 years ago, Ms. Jinghong Zhang wrote Puer, Ancient Caravans and Urban Chic. Soon after, this became my favorite tea book, and today I'm going to share it with you. Hi guys, this is Gabriele from nannuoshan, where we share the pleasure of drinking and discovering genuine farm tea. If you're also looking to expand your tea knowledge and brewing skills, make sure to click on the subscribe button and don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you enjoy what you're watching. Today is a very special video. I have been thinking about this video for many months, I could say actually for many years, and I never was maybe brave enough actually to sit down in front of the camera and speak about this book. And the reason is that this book is so very well written, is so important to me, that I always had the feeling if I'm going to describe it, it will be difficult to really render how nice the book is. But well, here I am. I will give a try today, and I really hope to pass over to you my passion for this book and how important it is for those of you that are into puer, but actually for anyone that is getting or is already serious about tea. So first of all, let's speak about the author, Ms. Jinghong Zhang. She actually has not much to do with tea, first of all, right? When you read the book about puer, a very specific topic in tea, you would expect that the author has some sort of interest. Either he or she is a tea producer, or is a tea merchant or a tea seller like myself, or maybe simply a tea lover that want to share his own opinion, his own view about tea. In this case, actually, Ms. Zhang had nothing to do with tea. She has no interest at all. She's an anthropologist. She's an anthropologist from Yunnan. She's a native from Yunnan, from Kunming. She's a lecturer at the Yunnan University. And in 2007, she started making some field research about puer. It was a very important year for those that don't know, because in 2007 we have seen a very steep rise in the price of puer, followed by a fall, a crash. And I don't know if she knew about that, or she was just, she was feeling that something was going to happen that year, or maybe she just started the research and she found herself in the middle of it. No matter what, she was really at the right moment. She has done some extensive research. This book has 17 pages of tiny written references, and the book itself is actually structured in 4 parts that actually go through the different seasons of 2007: spring, summer, autumn, and fall. And during this month, she explained what is actually happening during those months, but she does also a lot of interviews in Yunnan, in different places, and also in Hong Kong. She goes back to the history of puer, and she tried to give an overall understanding, actually, of what is authentic puer. So now I've been traveling in these days, and what I've been doing, I took the book with me and I started, during traveling, reading it again. When I had time, I was writing some notes that you see here. Those are actually some checks that, yeah, I got in some shops, and I just wrote on the back side of the checks, I wrote some notes. And today I will use those as a reference, as a guidance, because I don't want, to miss important aspect of this book. The book itself starts, if we go to page 13 I wrote here, start actually with an overview of the different tea category. And what you see in this table here, that among the green tea, they have also, they mention, or she mentions also, raw puer tea, so Sheng Pu'er, which is kind of unusual. We would expect puer to be in the fully fermented or in the dark teas. And maybe some of you at this point, by reading the book, would say, oh, that's all bullshit, I won't even continue reading. But this topic of which category puer belongs to will be explained and will be discussed through the whole book, as well as other topics that pop up at different time during the storytelling. And as you actually already saw in this page here, sometimes I write a T on the side, and you see it also on the next page. I have 2 T's here, and there are T's all during the book, and that means taste. It means that there are some tasting notes that I wanted to remark. And in fact, the book is a collection also of puer tasting notes, not so much the tasting note from the author, but rather the tasting notes from the interviews, those people that she met during her travelings and field research, and she was questioning about puer taste. So just by reading all these teas notes, you have a comprehensive overview of how actually puer tea tastes to tea lovers. So very interesting for those of you that are not so familiar about puer, or they just want to know a little bit another perspective of it. Then, in the very first page, she speaks also of a re-rise of puer in the 80s and 90s. This means right after the communism time, or actually right after the Mao Zedong time, when there was this reform era in China, the new opening, and how this has actually influenced tea and puer, and as a newborn, if you want, of puer in China. Um, the next chapter is about Jianghu. So, what is Jianghu? That's also a very interesting comparison. Actually, it's kind of difficult to explain, but I will try. So, Jianghu is actually means rivers and lakes, and is a term in China that refers to a kind of virtual space. Is used in different themes, most notoriously in the Arshal Mart movies, where you have these actors, these martial arts actors that move in a kind of space that is not real, where they do kind of fantastic things, and is a very dangerous place where there are rules, but not everyone follows the rules, where you have to fight martial art to find your, or so martial art, I wanted to say, to find your own way, and not always following the rules, but if you succeed, you can really achieve a very high level in the hierarchy, in the notoriousness, if you want, but that comes with a high risk. There is actually an interesting comparison with the Western world that was done on the web by a guy, I think an American guy, that did a review of this very book. Very nice review, I will put the link in the description below, and he compares the Jianghu with the Far West. So also in the Far West, you have these kind of rules and non-rules fights for power, and puer is pretty much the same. It doesn't matter if you are a consumer or if you are actually a producer. No matter what, there is always a kind of fight with other producers, with other consumers about who is right, who is wrong, who tastes what, and there is no real truth, right? Everyone can say whatever they want. So there is this comparison with the Jianghu that comes over and over again through the book, while the author questions what is actually authentic puer. That's really the very question that comes along through the whole book, and to which she tries, Ms. Zhang tries to give an answer. So then the books go on with some historical remark about puer. So for example, a comparison between Hong Kong and Taiwan and different ways of seeing puer, or even between different areas of production in Yunnan, and in particular, for example, between Menghai and EU. We have to say that, let's say, Ms. Zhang is not interested into tea, but she was born in the mid-70s in Kunming. She is a native from there. She has experienced tea all her life, and definitely more than myself and yourself. So somehow, although she has she's very humble actually in her ways and the way she describes things. She is completely disinterested about the topic, and this is what is very important in this book. Is very well written, very well researched, very well founded, but the author has no interest. I know that I said that at the beginning, and I want to say it again because this is really a key aspect of this book. So let's see what is going on. In the next chapter, we start with the spring. I told you before we have spring, summer, autumn, and winter. And in spring 2007, the prices were really rising quickly about puer, really a lot. And some people said that the prices were rising because the season was very dry, so there was not a lot of yield, and consequently, you know, a lot of demand, little offer, and so the prices were rising. And also because of the tourists. There were some tourists that just also a few years before came to Yunnan in search of authentic tea, and those tourists drove, I call them tourists actually, were tea lovers from Taiwan, drove up the price actually. So this was the initial thoughts about that. And then there is also in the next chapter, she explains, and I'm really giving you a very high level overview, but there are 200 pages here about all these, and with a lot of references really worth reading. She says then, she tried to explain in the next chapter how the national and local government influenced actually this rise of prices. For example, the government decided to rename a complete county from Simao to Puer. They gave to a whole county in Yunnan, they gave the name of the Puer Tea. And there was also the first discussion about an official definition of puer. For the first time in 2003, there was an official government-led definition of puer tea, and puer tea was defined based on the fact that it comes from large leaf tea from a very specific place, Yunnan, and actually not all Yunnan, but at that time I think it was 11 different districts where it could come from, and based on the taste. This is also kind of strange, because usually we know that the tea is defined according to the production method. But here we have a definition of puer that is done according, actually not to the production method, but to the taste, the type of leaf, and the origin. And more definition will come in the future, actually. Then there is another chapter. It's a bit windy. I hope you can hear me well. There is another chapter where she tried to point out which are the great values of puer, why puer is actually so much appreciated. And she mentioned the flavor, first of all. And in terms of flavor, she distinguishes very clearly between fresh puer and aged puer. Then she says the health value. This is a very important reason in China, a little bit less in the Western world. The cultural value, also much more important in China than in the Western world, and the financial value, the fact that the price was rising and people were investing into it. In fact, it is said that in those years, early 2000 up to 2007, actually even a little bit after, 95% of the whole tea that was bought was not bought for consumption, it was purchased for speculation and storage. So they start questioning, and already at that time there were a lot of magazines, local magazines in China about puer. They were like appreciating puer so much, but at the same time there were some the CCTV, so national level television, that came out with a reportage where they're saying how it's possible that 95% of the puer tea that is sold actually is not for consumption. Is that not already the indication of a bubble? And this was in the summer, actually, in the summer of 2007. Thereafter, the recession came. The prices at the end of summer and in autumn really fall really drastically. And she said she identifies three different causes for the recession. And for each of these, she brings argument and interviews and so on. So she says excessive propaganda, as we have already mentioned, both from private person and but also from the government. Excessive distribution fees. You have to think that those large tea factories, they had very high fees to the first distributor. So basically they were selling only tea to large distributors that had to pay very, very high fees to be allowed to buy tea directly from the factory. And basically the factory were really driving up those fees, and also the fact that fake production was approved. And on that, I want to say you something. You know, you can find a lot of very old tea, very famous tea on the market. Just do a search online, very easy, you can easily find shops that sells you incredible tea for a very affordable price. As a matter of fact, most of that tea is fake. And for me as a vendor, wouldn't be any difficult. You know, I go in China, I can find plenty of very old and very famous tea that maybe I also have find a way to sell it to you. It's just not really my interest, but just to say that it's very easy to find very famous and very aged tea. And that has been the case at that time and is the case today. And she says that this is also one of the reasons, one of the causes of the Great Recession that I've seen in Puer. Let me show you something here in the book. I have a note here to go to page 126. Let's see what it's about. Um, mm, mm, Oh yeah, I mean this is just actually there is not really much to read here, but in these pages she starts giving a brief history of Puer. It's just a few pages that goes very much into the details, um, not into the details, but straight to the point, right? She starts from a few centuries ago when actually the first family-driven Puer producer in EU actually started, and then all the history through the beginning of the past century to the difficulties during the war, what happened during the time after uh, the foundation of the People's Republic of China, and then what happened again at the end of the 70s, 80s, and 90s up to today. So just a few pages that gives you a very nice overview about that. And let me see. That's also interesting. The fact that nowadays people really search gushu. They search ancient tea trees. They would like wild tea and not cultivated tea. This very difference actually started just 15 years ago. It was for the first time in 2004 that non-pollarded forest tea, so leaves from non-pollarded forest tea trees, fetched prices higher than terrace tea, than cultivated tea. Until that point, there were both, but they had exactly the same price. There was no difference if the tea was from an old and a wild forestry or it was coming from a cultivated. Until 2004, there were really no difference in price, but things will change. So let me see what we have here. 143. Something worth reading. Let's read this small part here. Here it says that this tea was often kept in a ventilated place. The result was more pleasing though if the tea had been put in a mostly sealed room. Under such condition, the tea brew turned from light yellow to orange, and she's mentioning here within a few years, with a special plum aroma. But if exposed to moist air for the same period of time, the tea brew turned dark red with an obvious malty smell. So here she's kind of separating between dry storage and wet storage, and also giving some hints about how tea lovers describe those two tastes actually. All right, let's move on and let's see what is coming up. Oh, very interesting also then it comes with there is a chapter about tea tasting gatherings. So in those years there were even forum online actually that were organizing physical meetings where tea experts had to drink tea, provide their own feedback, and sometimes there was even a competition of who was actually tasting the most out of it. And this is very similar to what I've seen in other tea groups nowadays where there are tea experts that meet and there is always a fight about, yes, this tea is very old, oh no, this cake, you see the surface have good leaves but inside they put some other leaves, this definitely come for a 200 years old leaves, and no one knows which is the truth, right? So you can really pretend whatever you want and you can be totally convinced about what you say, because anyway there is no reason to really confirm or not what you're saying. And this is something that was already happening in China just 15 years ago and is still happening a little bit today. So I see here a very good comparison between what is happening here in the West, and she's really going to this tea tasting, interviewing the people, and trying to understand, say from a disinterested perspective, what is actually the driver in those meetings, what really the people think. And there is a very nice. Let me read this because I love this paragraph here. It says that drinking tea alone makes a person focus on the spirit of tea, but sharing it with others is superior. 3 to 4 people together can share more pleasure in drinking tea, 5 or 6 is too many, and 7 or 8 is charity. And this is really referring to another aspect of tea, and is very much in contact with those tea gathering and the fact that when you do gongfu cha, it's better to be just a few people. It's even better than being alone, but you won't want to be too many. You want to um, allow some exchange, but without really with harmony. It's important that we don't want to fight. And I know that this video and this book won't stop you for asking where does the tea come from, which is the cultivar, from which year, where it was harvested, it is spring, it is summer, how old was precisely the tree, was pollard, was not pollard, this is a forestry, was wild, was not wild, was cultivated. I know that you want to know all those details, but at the very end, it doesn't matter. If you like the taste of the tea, that's what you have to concentrate on. And I think this is the message that comes out also of this book. And she has done a lot of interviews, I told you, with the Yunnan people and also, for example, in Hong Kong. And what she found, that simply different person, especially belonging to different area, like tea of different age and of different type of storage, wet versus dry. And she found out that this very much influenced by the local environment and by the local food. So, for example, in Yunnan, people tends actually to drink very fresh tea, very fresh puer. They don't like aged puer. They started drinking aged puer just 10 to 15 years ago when tourists coming from Taiwan and Hong Kong were saying that it was the really good thing, and they were ready to pay a lot of money for it. But actually, Yunnanese would never store puer and never did. Very interesting, actually. Look at this. This is super cool. 187. So here, when I asked how long they have been drinking puer, most of my interviews from Yunnan told me that they had been doing so since the mid or late 90s or sometime after year 2000. No one gave a year prior to the mid 90s, suggesting that the popular and clear conception of puer tea didn't emerge in Yunnan until after that time, and especially after the turn of the 21st century. This means that really Yunnan people, and she's a Yunnan people, she grew up in Yunnan, never really drank puer. Even back in the days, puer was just produced and exported, sent over to overseas, to Malaysia, to Hong Kong, to Tibet, whatever. Cheap tea that have to go away. When I asked the same question in Hong Kong, most of my interviews found it hard to answer. Many of them said they had always been drunk puer tea. One elderly man whom I met at a Yumcha restaurant told me, I know that before I was born, my grandfather drank puer tea. So you see very different things. Actually, puer was drunk abroad. It's interesting, just on the next page, they also say that actually they never called puer puer. For them, puer was actually just one type of green tea. In Yunnan, there is a long tradition about green tea. There are different ways of producing green tea, in particular of drying it. One of that is drying it at the sun, and sun-dried green tea is what actually other people call the puer. But in Yunnan, they simply call it dianqing, which is the green tea, because it is produced actually as a green tea. So here, I won't start a dispute right now, but as you see, there is a lot of questioning what is actually puer, which type of tea actually puer belongs to. And what is also interesting that in the past, before the year end of the 90s, before that, people in Yunnan were either selling the fresh tea, pressed and selling it for abroad, or if they had to keep it for drinking, after 2 years, they were throwing it away. They were throwing it away, the pu'er, because it was changing in taste. They didn't like it anymore. Of course, nowadays, they keep it stored. And if you go in Kunming today, in tea houses in Kunming, you find a lot of pu'er. But if you would go in Kunming just 20 years ago, there was really no pu'er to drink. There was just green tea and maybe some black tea. At the end, there is a little bit a conclusion, and what she wants to point out at the end is just to say that actually the pu'er tradition is an invented tradition. There is no tradition about pu'er as such, in particular as a commodity and very expensive tea. Back in the days, it has always been a cheap tea for export. Also in Hong Kong, it hasn't been consumed at a very high level. It gets along well with dim sum, it gets along well with the grassy food that they have in Hong Kong, and it was just cheap tea. When then in the 80s and in the 90s, the living standard in China rose, there was the need of a new identity. People wanted to find good thing. There was a reconnection with the past, and that's when the Taiwanese, that actually bought originally pu'er from the Hong Kongese, went to EU and tried actually to find those ancient cakes of which they have read about. And starting from that, and this was the beginning of the year 2000, starting from that, there was a continued growth and growth of the importance of pu'er that was actually completely invented. So that's what I wanted to share today about pu'er, ancient caravan, and urban chic. I hope that this tiny video will help you and will, that I could transmit a little bit my passion for this book, and that now you go out and go buy it yourself, because I cannot describe all the content that is in here, and this provide you, and this is really my last sentence, this provide you a better understanding of what really not only pu'er is, but what the whole Chinese tea business is today. Because what is described here is something that I have experienced not only in pu'er, but in the whole tea market in China. Thanks a lot for watching. Don't forget to subscribe our channel if you haven't done it so, and go ahead, give us a thumbs up if you have enjoyed watching this video. Thank you very much, and I will see you the next time. Bye guys.